In the shadowy corridors of the Pentagon, where classified decisions shape the fate of nations, there exists a truth that generals would rather forget. Sometimes the most valuable asset isn't listed on any inventory. Captain Carol Reyes discovered this truth the hard way when a single piece of paper stripped away everything she had built over 15 years of service. But what Washington's power brokers didn't anticipate was that loyalty flows both ways, and that some bonds forged in the crucible of combat can't be severed by bureaucratic scissors. This is the story of a woman who became indispensable in a world that tried to erase her, and of the soldiers who risked everything to prove that honor isn't always found in orders from above. If you believe that competence should never be silenced and loyalty runs deeper than any official order, subscribe now. This channel is where truth, courage, and justice take center stage. The morning sun cast long shadows across the classified briefing room at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as Captain Carol Reyes spread the satellite photographs across the mahogany table. Her dark eyes, sharpened by years of analyzing enemy positions, traced the compound's perimeter with the precision of a surgeon planning an operation. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned respect from colonels twice her age, "this isn't just another extraction. The target is being held in a facility that changes security protocols every 6 hours. Standard assault tactics won't work. Major Bradley Thompson, leader of the elite Delta Force unit known only as Vanguard, leaned forward. At 38, Thompson was a decorated soldier whose weathered face told stories of a dozen classified missions. But when it came to intelligence analysis, he deferred to Carol without question. "What are you thinking, Captain?" Thompson asked, studying her expression. Carol's finger traced a seemingly insignificant service road on the photograph. "The compound has a blind spot here, where the kitchen waste is collected. Every Tuesday and Friday at 0400 hours, a truck arrives to empty the dumpsters. The guards have gotten comfortable with the routine, too comfortable." Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams, the team's demolitions expert, raised an eyebrow. "You want us to hide in a garbage truck?" "I want you to become invisible," Carol replied, her tone deadly serious. "The truck driver has a gambling problem. His bookie is pressuring him for payment. One conversation, properly handled, and we have our entry point." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just tactical planning, it was psychological warfare at its finest. Carol had spent weeks studying not just the compound's physical layout, but the personal vulnerabilities of everyone who worked there, from the commanding officer to the night janitor. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, the team's communications specialist, shook her head in admiration. "How do you even find this stuff?" Carol allowed herself a small smile. "Because I remember that every fortress is only as strong as the people defending it. And people," she paused, gathering the photographs, "people always have weaknesses." 3 days later, the mission was executed flawlessly. The target was extracted without a single shot fired, and Vanguard returned home with another success to add to their classified record. It was Carol's 43rd successful operation, and like the 42 before it, her name would never appear in any official report. That evening, Carol sat in her modest apartment off base, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing after-action reports. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, her graduating class from West Point, where she had finished third in her class despite being one of only 12 women in a class of nearly 1,000 cadets. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thompson. "Drinks with the team tomorrow night. You in?" Carol smiled as she typed back. Wouldn't miss it. She had no way of knowing it would be the last time she'd be invited. The next morning, Colonel James Morrison's office felt different. The American flag hung motionless in the corner, and the morning light filtering through the blinds seemed dimmer than usual. Morrison, a career military man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat, avoided Carol's gaze as she stood at attention before his desk. "Captain Reyes," he began, his voice strained with an emotion she couldn't identify. "I've received orders from the Pentagon regarding your current assignment." Carol felt her stomach tighten, though her expression remained neutral. "Sir." Morrison picked up a manila folder, his hands trembling slightly. "Effective immediately, you are being reassigned to administrative duties at Fort Leavenworth. Your security clearance is being reduced to secret level, and your access to Vanguard operations is terminated. The words hit Carol like physical blows. "Sir, may I ask the reason for this reassignment?" "The official reason is listed as administrative restructuring," Morrison replied, finally meeting her eyes. The pain in his expression was unmistakable. "Carol, I want you to know that this decision didn't come from me. I fought it as hard as I could, but not hard enough," Carol said quietly, the first crack in her professional composure. Morrison's jaw tightened. "There are forces at work here that are bigger than both of us. People who see the military as a chess game and soldiers as pieces to be moved around the board." Carol remained at attention, though inside she felt like she was falling. "When do I report to Leavenworth, sir?" "You have 72 hours to clear out your office and transfer your files." Morrison stood, extending his hand. "Captain, it's been an honor serving with you. Your country owes you a debt it can never repay." Carol shook his hand, her grip firm despite the turmoil in her chest. "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor serving under your command." As she turned to leave, Morrison called her name. "Carol!" She paused at the door. "Yes, sir. This isn't over. People like you. The military needs people like you." Carol nodded once and left the office, her military bearing intact even as her world crumbled around her. In the hallway, she passed several junior officers who snapped to attention, unaware that they were saluting a woman who had just been erased from the most important work of her life. The Vanguard team gathered at Murphy's Bar, a dive establishment 3 miles from Fort Bragg that had become their unofficial headquarters for post-mission debriefings. The dim lighting and worn leather booths provided the kind of anonymity that allowed classified soldiers to unwind without worrying about who might be listening. Major Thompson sat nursing his third beer, his usual post-mission euphoria notably absent. Across the table, Sergeant Williams was methodically shredding a napkin, while Lieutenant Chun stared at her untouched drink with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "She should be here," Williams finally said, breaking the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the group. "Yeah, well, she's not," Thompson replied, his voice carrying an edge that his teammates had rarely heard. "And apparently, she won't be here for any future celebrations either." Chun looked up, confusion written across her young face. "I still don't understand. Carol's the best intelligence officer I've ever worked with. Why would they transfer her now?" Staff Sergeant Kevin Rodriguez, the team sniper, leaned back in his booth. "You really want to know what I think? I think someone upstairs got nervous about a woman having too much influence over a special operations unit." "That's bullshit," Thompson said, but his tone suggested he'd had the same thought. Williams crumpled the shredded napkin and tossed it onto the table. "Remember the Kandahar mission last year? Carol's analysis saved our asses when the intelligence from Langley was completely wrong. If we'd follow the CIA's plan, we'd all be dead. Or the extraction in Somalia," Chin added, her voice growing heated. She identified a 3-hour window when the target would be vulnerable based on his daughter's soccer schedule. His daughter's soccer schedule. Who else thinks like that? Thompson drained his beer and signaled the waitress for another. "Look, I made some calls today. Talked to a friend at the Pentagon. Word is that there's been pressure from certain congressional committees about the composition of elite units." The table fell silent as the implications sank in. Rodriguez was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "They got rid of her because she's a woman." "We don't know that for certain," Thompson said, but his words lacked conviction. "Don't we?" Williams countered. "She's the smartest tactical mind any of us have ever worked with. Her success rate is literally perfect. But suddenly she's being transferred to push papers at Leavenworth? Come on, Major. Connect the dots." Chen's hands clenched into fists on the table. "This is insane. How can they just throw away someone like Carol?" Thompson looked around the table at his team, his family really. These were people who had trusted each other with their lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The bonds forged in combat were supposed to be unbreakable, but now those bonds were being tested by forces beyond their control. "What are we going to do about it?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "What can we do?" Thompson replied. "We're soldiers. We follow orders." Williams leaned forward, his voice intense. "Are we? Or are we just really well-trained killers who happen to wear uniforms?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Each man at the table had joined the military for different reasons: patriotism, family tradition, lack of other options, but they had all come to believe in something larger than themselves. Now that belief was being challenged by the very institution they had sworn to serve. Chen broke the silence. "I need to tell you guys something. Yesterday, after we got back from the mission, Carol pulled me aside. She said she was proud of how far I'd come as an intelligence analyst. She said," Chen's voice caught slightly, "she said that I had the potential to be even better than she was." "That sounds like Carol," Rodriguez said with a sad smile. Always thinking about the next generation, Thompson felt something hardening in his chest, a resolve that he recognized from his most dangerous missions. You know what? Maybe Williams is right. Maybe we need to decide who we really are. 3 days later, the team received notification of their next assignment, a high-priority extraction mission in Syria. The briefing was scheduled for 0600 hours, with deployment at 1800. It would be their first mission without Carol's intelligence analysis, and everyone felt the absence like a missing limb. Thompson stood before the mission board in the briefing room, staring at the photographs and tactical overlays that would normally have been annotated with Carol's precise handwriting. Instead, he saw generic intelligence reports from multiple agencies, competent, but lacking the surgical precision that had made their previous missions so successful. Colonel Morrison entered the room, followed by a man in civilian clothes whom Thompson didn't recognize. The stranger had the soft look of someone who had never been shot at, but his bearing suggested significant authority. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carefully neutral, "this is Mr. Patterson from the Defense Intelligence Agency. He'll be providing tactical analysis for this mission." Patterson stepped forward with a confidence that immediately grated on Thompson's nerves. "I've reviewed your unit's previous operations, and I'm confident we can maintain your success rate with the new intelligence protocols." Williams and Rodriguez exchanged glances. Chen's jaw visibly tightened. "Sir," Thompson said carefully, with respect, Captain Reyes had developed specific methodologies for analyzing target sites. "Will those protocols be available?" Patterson's smile was patronizing. "Captain, we appreciate the contributions of your previous analyst, but the DIA has resources and capabilities that far exceed what any single officer could provide." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thompson felt his team's tension like electricity in the air. "I see," Thompson said quietly. "And you're confident in your assessment of the target site?" "Absolutely. We have 3 separate intelligence streams confirming the target's location and the security arrangements." Thompson looked at the mission photos again, seeing gaps in the analysis that Carol would have identified immediately. The compound's defensive positions were marked, but there was no assessment of the guards' behavioral patterns. The entry points were identified, but there was no analysis of which routes would minimize civilian exposure. It was competent intelligence work, but it wasn't Carol's work. "Major," Morrison prompted, "do you have any questions about the mission parameters?" Thompson met his colonel's eyes and saw something there, a challenge, perhaps, or an invitation. The older man knew exactly what he was asking. "No, sir," Thompson replied. "No questions about the mission." But as the briefing continued, Thompson's mind was already working on a different problem entirely. By the time Patterson finished his presentation, the major had made a decision that would change everything. The C-130 transport aircraft sat on the tarmac at Pope Air Force Base, its engines warming up for the flight to the staging area in Jordan. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just a mission, it's a rebellion against silence. Like, comment, and tell us, what would you risk for someone who never gave up on you? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the airfield as the Vanguard team made their final equipment checks. Each soldier moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this dozens of times before, but there was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the upcoming mission. Major Thompson stood near the aircraft's loading ramp, his gear bag at his feet, watching his team prepare. Sergeant Williams was methodically cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time in an hour, a nervous habit that Thompson had learned to recognize as a sign of internal conflict. Lieutenant Chen sat on a nearby crate, staring at her communications equipment with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. Colonel Morrison approached the group, accompanied by Patterson and two other civilians whom Thompson didn't recognize. The colonel's face was carefully neutral, but Thompson caught the slight tightness around his eyes, a tell that suggested Morrison was as uncomfortable with the situation as the soldiers were. "Major Thompson," Morrison called out. "Final briefing in 10 minutes. Thompson nodded and turned to his team. "You heard the colonel. Let's wrap this up." As the team gathered their gear, Williams moved closer to Thompson. "Major, can I have a word?" Thompson followed the sergeant a few steps away from the others. Williams glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then leaned in close. "I've been thinking about what we discussed at Murphy's," Williams said quietly. "About who we really are." "Marcus, this isn't the time." "When is the time?" Williams interrupted, his voice urgent but controlled. "When we're halfway across the world, relying on intelligence from someone who's never been in combat. When we're walking into a situation that Carol would have seen coming from a mile away." Thompson felt the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. He had led these men through impossible situations, had made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. But this decision felt different, bigger somehow, with consequences that extended far beyond their immediate mission. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sergeant?" Williams met his eyes directly. "I'm suggesting that we remember what Captain Reyes taught us about loyalty. She never left us behind, Major. Never." Before Thompson could respond, Chin appeared at his elbow. "Major, you need to see this." She handed him her tablet, displaying an encrypted message that had just arrived through back channels. Thompson's face darkened as he read the contents. "What is it?" Williams asked. Thompson looked around the tarmac, then back at his screen. "Intelligence update from one of Carol's old contacts. The target site has been compromised. Security was increased 3 hours ago." Williams felt his blood run cold. "Does Patterson know?" "I doubt it. This is coming through Carol's personal network, sources that took her years to develop." Chen's voice was tight with anger. "So we're walking into a trap because they threw away the one person who could have warned us." Thompson stared at the message, his mind racing. He could share this intelligence with Patterson and Morrison, follow proper channels, trust the system. Or, "Major Thompson." Morrison's voice carried across the tarmac. "We're ready for you." Thompson looked at his team, these people who had trusted him with their lives, who had followed him into hell and back. Williams was right. This was about more than following orders. This was about understanding what loyalty really meant. "Change of plans," Thompson said quietly. "Rodriguez, get on the horn to Carol. Encrypted channel only." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Sir, you heard me. And Sarah, I need you to patch into her old intelligence network. See what else she can tell us about this target." Chen's eyes widened. "Major, that's technically—" "I know what it is, Lieutenant. The question is, are you with me?" For a moment, nobody moved. Thompson watched his team wrestle with the implications of what he was asking. They would be going outside the official chain of command, relying on intelligence from someone who was no longer authorized to provide it. If things went wrong, their careers would be over. If things went very wrong, they could face court-martial. Williams was the first to smile. "Hell, Major. I thought you'd never ask." Rodriguez was already pulling out his satellite phone. "I'll reach out to the captain now." Chin nodded firmly. "Her network is still active. I can have updates within the hour." Thompson felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that he hadn't experienced since Carol's reassignment. "Good. But understand this. What we're doing here crosses a line. There's no going back from this." "Then we better make sure it works," Williams replied. 20 minutes later, Thompson sat in the final briefing, listening to Patterson outline an operation that he now knew was based on fatally flawed intelligence. The DI analyst spoke with the confidence of someone who had never had to pay the price for being wrong, describing security measures that were hours out of date and entry points that were likely compromised. Morrison noticed Thompson's expression. "Major, do you have concerns about the mission profile?" Thompson met the colonel's eyes and saw something there, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or recognition. The older man knew his soldiers better than anyone, and he had to understand that something was happening beneath the surface. "Sir, I'd like to request a 12-hour delay to verify some intelligence details." Patterson looked annoyed. "Major, We have multiple confirmation sources. The intelligence is solid. With respect, sir, I'd prefer to be certain. The room fell silent. Morrison studied Thompson's face, reading the subtext of the request. After 30 years in the military, the colonel had learned to trust his instincts about people, and his instincts were telling him that Thompson knew something he didn't. What kind of verification are you thinking about, Major? Thompson chose his words carefully. I have access to some supplementary sources that might provide additional confirmation. Patterson's eyes narrowed. What sources? All intelligence for this operation is supposed to flow through my office. Sources that have proven reliable in the past. Thompson replied evenly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Morrison looked back and forth between his major and the DI analyst, clearly weighing competing loyalties. Finally, Morrison spoke. Mr. Patterson, would you give us the room for a moment? Patterson looked like he wanted to object, but something in Morrison's tone suggested that it wouldn't be wise. Of course, Colonel. I'll be outside if you need me. After the civilian left, Morrison leaned back in his chair. Brad, what's really going on here? Thompson took a deep breath. Sir, I believe our intelligence is compromised. I have reason to think the target site security has been upgraded significantly. And your source for this information? Thompson met his colonel's eyes directly. Captain Reyes. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded on the table in front of him. I see. Sir, I know this puts you in a difficult position. Morrison held up a hand. Major, let me ask you a question. In your professional opinion, is Captain Reyes' intelligence more reliable than what we're getting from the DIA? Thompson didn't hesitate. Absolutely, sir. And you trust her assessment of the situation? With my life, sir. And more importantly, with the lives of my team. Morrison nodded slowly. Then I suggest you take whatever time you need to verify your intelligence. The mission can wait until tomorrow. As Thompson left the briefing room, he felt the weight of what they were setting in motion. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Vanguard had chosen Carol Reyes over the official intelligence apparatus. It was an act of defiance that would have consequences far beyond their immediate mission. But as he looked at his team, his family, Thompson knew they had made the only choice they could live with. Carol Reyes sat in her temporary quarters at Fort Leavenworth, staring at the stack of administrative files that had become her new reality. The transition from analyzing terrorist compounds to processing supply requisitions felt like a cruel joke, but she had maintained her professional demeanor throughout the first week of her reassignment. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message, and her heart stopped when she saw the sender, Rodriguez. Captain, need your eyes on something urgent. Can you talk? Carol glanced at her watch, 2,300 hours. Whatever this was about, it couldn't wait for normal business hours. She moved to her secure communications setup, a personal system she had maintained despite her reduced clearance level. Rodriguez's voice came through clearly despite the encryption. Captain, we've got a problem with tomorrow's mission. The official intelligence is wrong. Carol felt her pulse quicken. Kevin, you shouldn't be calling me about operational matters. I'm no longer. Ma'am, with respect, we don't care about what some paper pushers in Washington say. We care about not getting killed, because they threw away the best analyst in the military. Despite everything, Carol smiled. What's the situation? For the next hour, Rodriguez briefed her on the Syrian extraction mission, sharing details that she technically no longer had clearance to receive. As he spoke, Carol's mind automatically began processing the information, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities that the DIA analysis had missed. The compound layout they showed you is at least 6 months old, she said finally. I have contacts who reported significant security upgrades last month. What they're calling the primary entry point. It's been wired with motion sensors. Jesus, Rodriguez muttered. So what do you recommend? Carol was quiet for a moment, feeling the familiar rush of tactical analysis. This was what she had been born to do, what she had trained for her entire adult life. The fact that she was no longer officially authorized to do it seemed almost irrelevant. Give me 12 hours. I need to reach out to some sources and get current intelligence on the ground situation. Captain, if you do this, if you help us, there could be consequences. Carol looked around her sterile quarters at the meaningless paperwork covering her desk, at the photograph of her West Point graduating class that now seemed like a relic from another lifetime. Kevin, what consequences could be worse than sitting here while my team walks into a trap? The next morning, Carol's intelligence network, carefully cultivated over 15 years of service, came alive. Sources in Damascus, Jordan, and Turkey provided real-time updates on the target site. By noon, she had compiled a comprehensive analysis that painted a very different picture from the DIA's assessment. The security upgrades were extensive. The target had been moved to a more secure location within the compound. The guard rotation had been changed, and additional surveillance equipment had been installed. Most critically, intelligence suggested that the target's captor's suspected an extraction attempt was imminent. Carol transmitted her findings to Thompson through encrypted channels, along with an alternative operational plan that accounted for the new security measures. As she hit send, she realized she had just committed herself to a course of action that could end her military career entirely. Her phone rang an hour later. Thompson's voice was tense but grateful. "Carol, this intelligence is gold. But I need you to know, if we use this, if we go against the official plan, everyone's going to know where it came from." "I understand, Brad. Do you? Because this isn't just about one mission anymore. This is about whether the people who actually do the fighting get to have a say in how it's done." Carol stared out her window at the Kansas landscape, so different from the urban battlefields where she had spent most of her career. "You know what I realized sitting here this week? They didn't just reassign me. They tried to erase me. 15 years of building relationships, developing sources, understanding how our enemies think, and they threw it all away because it was inconvenient. So what do we do about it? We prove that they were wrong. We show them what happens when you discard your best people for political reasons." Thompson was quiet for a moment. "Carol, there's something else you should know. The team, they're planning something. If this mission goes south because of bad intelligence, they're prepared to make a statement." "What kind of statement?" "The kind that gets everyone's attention." Carol felt a chill run down her spine. She knew these men well enough to understand what Thompson was implying. They were prepared to go public, to break the silence that surrounded special operations and expose the decision-makers who were gambling with their lives. "Brad, you can't. We can and we will. The question is, are you with us?" Carol closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything she had worked for pressing down on her shoulders. Her entire identity was wrapped up in serving her country, in being part of something larger than herself. But what happened when the institution you served no longer valued your service? "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Your complete intelligence file on the target area, your assessment of the operation, and most importantly, your willingness to stand up and tell the truth about what really happened here." Carol opened her laptop and began pulling files from her personal archives, intelligence reports, source assessments, tactical analyses that represented years of work. As she compiled the information, she thought about the young lieutenant she had been at West Point, so certain that serving her country would always be a noble calling. "Brad." "Yeah." "Promise me something. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no backing down when things get uncomfortable. You have my word." As Carol transmitted the comprehensive intelligence package to Thompson, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the hope of a successful mission or a promotion or recognition, but the hope that came from knowing you were standing on the right side of a line that mattered. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Captain Reyes, this is Lieutenant Chen. Just wanted you to know, you taught me that intelligence work isn't about following procedures. It's about protecting the people who trust you. Thank you for protecting us." Carol smiled as she typed back. "Sarah, you taught me something too. You taught me that the next generation is worth fighting for." Outside her window, the sun was setting over the Kansas plains, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the carefully maintained silence around special operations would be broken, and the world would learn what happened when politics collided with the realities of combat. But tonight, Carol Reyes felt like a soldier again. The secure communications center at Fort Bragg buzzed with activity as the sun rose over North Carolina. Colonel Morrison stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time feeds from the Middle East, his coffee growing cold in his hand as he watched his most elite unit prepare for a mission that had already gone far beyond normal parameters. Major Thompson's voice crackled through the speakers from Jordan. Command, Vanguard is in position. Beginning final equipment checks. Morrison keyed his microphone. Copy, Vanguard. Weather is clear, and you have a go for mission execution at your discretion. What Morrison didn't say, what couldn't be said over open channels, was that he knew Thompson was operating with intelligence that hadn't come through official sources. The colonel had made a choice to trust his people over the bureaucrats, and now he would have to live with the consequences. In the back of the communications center, Patterson paced nervously, his civilian clothes making him stand out among the military personnel. Colonel, I should be in direct communication with the team leader. This is highly irregular. Morrison didn't take his eyes off the monitors. Mr. Patterson, in my experience, the best way to support special operations is to let them do their job. But the intelligence protocols, Morrison said firmly, are designed by people who have never had to kick down a door in a foreign country. My men know how to adapt to changing conditions. 3,000 miles away, Carol sat in her quarters with her own secure communications setup, monitoring the mission through back channels that technically no longer existed. She had spent the night fine-tuning the intelligence package, incorporating last-minute updates from her sources on the ground. Now she could only wait and hope that her analysis would keep her team alive. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Thompson. Package received and analyzed. You were right about everything. Security is tripled, but we found the alternative entry point you identified. Moving to execute in 30 minutes. Carol typed back quickly. Remember, the guard change happens at 0430 local time. You'll have a 7-minute window where the northeast corridor is minimally monitored. Copy. Carol, whatever happens next, I want you to know that this team is stronger because of you. Carol stared at the screen, feeling tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed since her reassignment. Bring everyone home, Brad. That's all I've ever wanted. The mission unfolded exactly as Carol had predicted. The team moved through the compound like ghosts, avoiding the upgraded security measures that the official intelligence had missed. The extraction was completed in 18 minutes with no casualties and minimal exposure. By any measure, it was a textbook operation. But as Vanguard prepared to return to base, Thompson made a decision that would change everything. Command, this is Vanguard Actual. Mission successful, package secured. But I need to transmit an additional report through secure channels. Morrison's voice carried a note of concern. Go ahead, Vanguard. Sir, the official intelligence for this mission was fatally flawed. Had we followed the provided operational plan, we would have walked into a prepared ambush. The mission succeeded only because we had access to alternative intelligence sources. The communications center fell silent. Patterson stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Major Thompson, you're out of line. The DIA provided comprehensive. The DIA provided garbage, Thompson interrupted, his voice carrying across the airwaves with startling clarity. And if it wasn't for Captain Carol Reyes, this entire team would be dead right now. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Thompson had just blown up the carefully maintained fiction that Carol's reassignment was routine. There would be no walking this back, no quiet resolution behind closed doors. Major, Morrison said carefully, perhaps this discussion should continue when you return to base. No, sir, with respect, it shouldn't. Because right now, we're sitting in a helicopter that should have been shot down, holding a package that should have been impossible to extract, because the best intelligence officer in the United States military was thrown away by people who have never been in combat. Patterson was furious. Colonel Morrison, I demand that you order Major Thompson to cease this transmission immediately. Morrison looked at the DIA analyst, then at his communications staff, then at the monitors showing his team's successful extraction. After 30 years in the military, he had learned to recognize moments when principles mattered more than procedures. Mr. Patterson, I think you should hear what my major has to say. For the next 10 minutes, Thompson provided a detailed account of how Carol's intelligence had saved the mission, contrasting it point by point with the official analysis. He didn't just critique the DIA's work, he systematically demolished it, showing how every critical assessment had been wrong. The question we need to ask ourselves, Thompson concluded, is whether we're more interested in protecting the feelings of bureaucrats or protecting the lives of soldiers. Back at Fort Leavenworth, Carol listened to Thompson's transmission with a mixture of pride and terror. He was burning bridges that could never be rebuilt, sacrificing his own career to make a point about hers. It was an act of loyalty that went far beyond anything she could have expected. Her phone rang. Colonel Morrison's voice was grave. "Carol, I think you need to get on a plane." "Sir?" "Because in about 6 hours, every reporter in Washington is going to want to talk to you. Major Thompson just made sure of that." Carol felt her heart racing. "Colonel, I never asked Brad to." "I know you didn't, but he did it anyway, because that's the kind of man he is. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" Carol looked around her quarters, at the meaningless paperwork, at the photograph of her graduating class, at the window that looked out on a landscape far from any battlefield. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again. "Sir, I'm going to tell the truth." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Carol, you understand what that means? There's no going back from this. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built. Colonel, with respect, they already took everything I built. Now I'm going to build something new." 2 hours later, Carol was on a military transport bound for Washington, D.C., carrying with her a comprehensive file that documented not just the Syrian mission, but years of successful operations that had been achieved through her intelligence work. She had made copies of every report, every analysis, every piece of communication that showed how critical her contributions had been to national security. As the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, Carol opened her laptop and began writing what would become the most important document of her career, a detailed account of how bureaucratic politics had compromised military effectiveness and how the bonds of loyalty between soldiers had ultimately saved lives that the system was willing to sacrifice. She was no longer just fighting for her own vindication. She was fighting for every competent officer who had been sidelined for political reasons, every experienced soldier whose expertise had been dismissed by people who had never faced enemy fire. The plane flew through the night toward Washington, carrying a woman who was about to remind the nation's capital that some truths couldn't be buried in classified files. The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room was packed beyond capacity, with reporters lining the walls and cameras capturing every moment of what had already been dubbed the Reyes Affair by the Washington Press Corps. Carol sat at the witness table in her dress blue uniform, her ribbons and decorations telling the story of 15 years of distinguished service. Across from her, a panel of senators prepared to ask questions that would determine not just her future, but the future of how America's military valued expertise over politics. Senator Margaret Walsh, the committee chairwoman, called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. A former Navy JAG officer herself, Walsh understood the delicate balance between military discipline and the need for accountability. "Captain Reyes," Walsh began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed chamber, "you are here to testify about the circumstances surrounding your recent reassignment and its impact on military operations. Before we begin, I want to remind you that you are under oath and that your testimony may have significant consequences for your military career." Carol leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I understand, Senator. I'm prepared to tell the truth about what happened, regardless of the personal cost." Senator Richard Hayes, ranking Republican member and a vocal critic of women in combat roles, shuffled his papers dismissively. "Captain, isn't it true that your reassignment was part of routine administrative reorganization? That you're here today simply because you're unhappy about being transferred to a less prestigious position?" Carol had expected this line of attack. "Senator, with respect, there was nothing routine about my reassignment. I was removed from a position where I had achieved a perfect success rate over 43 critical missions, with no advance notice and no opportunity to transition my knowledge to a replacement. But surely the military has competent intelligence officers who could perform your duties." Carol paused, choosing her words carefully. "Senator, intelligence work isn't just about analyzing data. It's about building relationships with sources, understanding cultural contexts, and recognizing patterns that take years to develop. When you remove someone from that network overnight, you don't just lose an analyst, you lose an entire web of connections that kept American soldiers alive." Senator Maria Santos, a former Army reservist, leaned forward. "Captain Reyes, can you walk us through what happened with the Syrian extraction mission? For the next 20 minutes, Carol provided a detailed account of how her unofficial intelligence support had saved the Vanguard team. She presented side-by-side comparisons of the official DIA analysis and her own assessment, showing point by point how the official intelligence had been dangerously inadequate. The compound security had been upgraded 3 weeks before the mission, Carol explained, displaying photographs on the chamber's large screens. Motion sensors had been installed at what the DIA identified as the primary entry point. Guard rotations had been changed. Most critically, intelligence suggested the captors were expecting an extraction attempt. Senator Hayes interrupted. "Captain, how could you possibly have known this information when the Defense Intelligence Agency, with all its resources, did not?" Carol's answer cut to the heart of the issue. "Because I had spent 3 years cultivating sources in that region, Senator. People who trusted me personally, who were willing to risk their lives to provide accurate information. When I was reassigned, those relationships didn't transfer to my replacement, they simply disappeared." The hearing room was silent as the implications sank in. Senator Walsh spoke first. "Are you saying that your removal compromised ongoing intelligence operations?" "I'm saying that intelligence work is fundamentally about human relationships, and those relationships can't be bureaucratically transferred like files in a cabinet. When you remove an experienced officer from their network, you lose years of investment in sources and contacts." Senator Hayes, growing visibly frustrated, played his strongest card. "Captain, isn't it true that there were concerns about your leadership style? That some superiors felt you had become too influential with the special operations teams?" Carol felt her jaw tighten, recognizing the subtext of the question. "Senator, if by influential you mean that the soldiers I supported trusted my analysis and valued my contributions to their missions, then yes, I was influential. If you mean that I somehow overstepped my authority or compromised command structure, then no, I never received any such feedback during my entire career." At the back of the hearing room, Major Thompson sat in his dress uniform, having been called to testify later in the session. Beside him, the other members of Vanguard watched their former intelligence officer defend not just herself, but the principle that competence should matter more than politics. Senator Santos addressed the core issue directly. "Captain, in your professional opinion, was your reassignment based on performance issues or other factors?" Carol took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would define the rest of her career. "Senator, I believe I was reassigned because certain individuals in the Pentagon were uncomfortable with a woman having significant influence over elite military units. Despite my track record, despite the success rate of the missions I supported, someone decided that the optics of my position were more important than the effectiveness of our operations." The hearing room erupted in murmurs and camera flashes. Senator Hayes looked apoplectic. "Captain, that's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof of gender discrimination?" "I have the proof of results, Senator. 43 successful missions with 0 friendly casualties. I have the proof of what happened when that expertise was removed. A team that nearly walked into an ambush because the replacement intelligence was inadequate. And I have the proof of what my unit did when they realized their lives were being gambled with for political reasons." Senator Walsh called for order, then addressed Carol directly. "Captain, what do you believe should happen as a result of this situation?" Carol straightened in her chair, her voice carrying the authority she had earned through years of keeping soldiers alive. "Senator, I believe the military should promote officers based on competence, not gender. I believe that when you remove expertise from critical positions, you should have a plan for maintaining operational effectiveness. And most importantly, I believe that the people who make decisions about military operations should be held accountable for the consequences of those decisions." The hearing continued for 3 more hours, with senators from both parties grilling Carol about the details of her service, her reassignment, and the broader implications for military readiness. Through it all, she maintained her composure, answering each question with the precision and analytical clarity that had made her such an effective intelligence officer. When Major Thompson finally took the witness table, his testimony was even more damning. He provided classified details about previous missions where Carol's intelligence had meant the difference between success and disaster, painting a picture of an officer whose contributions were far beyond the norm. "Senators," Thompson concluded, Captain Reyes isn't just an excellent intelligence officer, she's irreplaceable. And when you make irreplaceable people disappear for political reasons, you compromise not just their careers, but national security itself. The hearing ended with Senator Walsh announcing that the committee would conduct a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding Carol's reassignment, and that reforms would be implemented to prevent similar situations in the future. As Carol left the hearing room, she was surrounded by reporters shouting questions about her future plans and the military's response to her testimony. She pushed through the crowd without comment, but her mind was already working on what came next. 3 weeks later, Carol received 2 pieces of news that would define the rest of her life. The first was an official letter from the Pentagon, informing her that her reassignment had been reversed, and that she was being promoted to major with a new position overseeing intelligence operations for all Special Forces units. The second was a phone call from a private military contractor offering her a position as Director of Intelligence Analysis at twice her military salary, with the freedom to build her own team and develop her own methodologies. Carol sat in her apartment at Fort Bragg. She had been quietly transferred back while the investigation was ongoing, staring at both offers. The Pentagon's letter represented vindication, a return to the career she had built over 15 years. The contractor's offer represented freedom, a chance to work without the political constraints that had nearly destroyed her. Her phone rang. Major Thompson's voice was warm with satisfaction. "So, Major Reyes, how does it feel to be right?" Carol smiled at the promotion in his greeting. "It feels like a beginning, Brad, not an ending. Any thoughts on which offer you're going to take?" Carol looked out her window at the base where she had spent so many years of her life, at the buildings where she had planned missions that saved American lives, at the community of soldiers who had become her family. "You know what I realized during the hearing? This was never about me. It was about whether we're going to let politics destroy military effectiveness. And that fight isn't over just because I won my personal battle." Thompson was quiet for a moment. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying, but on my terms this time. No more quiet acceptance of bureaucratic nonsense. No more allowing politics to override competence. And absolutely no more letting good officers get thrown away because they don't fit someone's preferred demographic profile." "That sounds like a revolution, Carol." Carol laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Maybe it is, but it's a revolution that's long overdue." 6 months later, Major Carol Reyes stood before a new class of intelligence officers at the Special Operations Intelligence Course, looking out at faces that reflected the diversity of modern America. Men and women, different ethnicities and backgrounds, all united by their commitment to keeping American soldiers alive through superior analysis and planning. "Intelligence work," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had proven her worth under fire, "is not about following procedures or pleasing superiors. It's about understanding that somewhere out there, soldiers are depending on you to see what others miss, to think what others won't think, and to fight for the truth even when that truth is inconvenient." In the back of the classroom, Major Thompson watched with pride as his former intelligence officer began training the next generation. The woman who had been discarded as politically inconvenient was now shaping the future of military intelligence, ensuring that competence would always matter more than politics. "Your job," Carol continued, addressing her students but speaking to something larger, "is to remember that behind every analysis, every report, every recommendation, there are real people whose lives depend on your work. Never let anyone make you forget that truth is more important than comfort, and that the best service you can give your country is the courage to be right, even when being right is difficult." As the class began their first exercise in tactical analysis, Carol reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been erased, discarded, written off by people who thought they understood what mattered in the modern military. But she had learned something valuable in the process. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in the halls of power where decisions are made about who gets to serve and how they get to serve. The woman who had once been deemed too influential to keep had become exactly what the military needed. A leader who understood that true strength came not from avoiding difficult truths, but from facing them head-on, regardless of the personal cost. Outside the classroom windows, the sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The colors of courage, the colors of sacrifice, the The colors of a nation defended by people who understood that some principles were worth fighting for, no matter what the price. Carol Reyes had paid that price, and in doing so, had reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to disappear quietly into the night. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in standing up for what's right, even when it costs everything. And tell us in the comments, what does loyalty mean to you? Here on this channel, we tell stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable. If you want more, hit the bell and join our community of truth seekers and storytellers.